yet tore the papers from the folder and dropped them in front of her like she was a secretary he was done with. Not across a desk, not with any attempt at privacy. Right there in the middle of the Ashcroft Group's glass-walled lobby, where a dozen employees froze at their stations pretending not to watch, where the security guard near the elevator suddenly found something very interesting on the ceiling, where the marble floors seemed to amplify every small sound until the soft slap of those papers landing felt like a gunshot. "Sign them," Cale Ashcroft said. "Today." Serena Vale looked down at the divorce papers. Then she picked up the pen clipped to the folder, signed her name on the line, 3 letters, a pause, 2 more, and handed everything back to him without a word. He'd expected something. Tears, maybe. Or that particular silence women use when they want you to know they're devastated but are too proud to show it. What he didn't expect was the absolute stillness in her face. Not numbness, not shock. Something worse than both. She already knew. She'd been waiting. If you've ever felt invisible inside your own life, stay with me. Because this story isn't just about a woman who was underestimated. It's about what happens when the people who underestimated her finally find out who she really is. Before we go further, if this is your first time here, hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you never miss what's coming next. These stories don't pull punches, and drop a comment below telling me what city or country you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now, let's go back to the beginning. 5 years. Serena Vale had been Serena Ashcroft on paper for 5 years, though no one in Khalil's world had bothered to use that name. At charity functions, she was introduced as Khalil's wife, with a slight pause before the word, the kind of pause that said, "if you can believe it." At board dinners, she sat at the far end of the table and was not consulted about anything. At the Ashcroft family's annual estate gathering in the Hamptons, his mother had once handed her a tray of canapes, thinking she was hired staff. Serena had smiled and passed the tray to an actual server without correcting her. She had a talent for making herself easy to overlook. That talent had kept her alive since she was 19 years old. But nobody in this lobby knew that. What the Ashcroft employees saw when they watched her walk out that morning, straight back, one small carry-on bag slung over her shoulder, her dark coat buttoned against the November air, was a woman who had been quietly discarded. Another soft-spoken wife who hadn't been enough for a man like Kyle. They felt sorry for her the way people feel sorry for stray cats, briefly, and without any real intention of doing anything about it. She stepped through the revolving glass door and didn't look back. Cale watched her go from the second-floor railing, papers folded in his jacket pocket. He told himself he felt nothing. He'd practiced feeling nothing for so long that he'd gotten good at it, or at least good at performing it in front of other people. Matteo, his chief of operations, appeared at his shoulder with the day's schedule already queued on his tablet and didn't ask a single question about what had just happened in the lobby. That was why Matteo kept his job. "The Lachlan meeting got pushed to 3, Matteo said. "Fine. And your father called again." Kyle took his eyes off the lobby entrance. "What does he want?" He didn't say, just that it was important. Everything was always important with his father. Aldrich Ashcroft had been calling it important since the first time he dragged a teenage Kyle into a boardroom and explained in the measured voice of a man who considered warmth a liability that the Ashcroft name was not a birthright. It was a responsibility. And responsibilities, his father said, did not have feelings. "Tell him I'll call after the Lachlan meeting." He walked back to his office without asking what was in Serena's bag, without wondering where she was going, without doing any of the things a person does when they've shared a bed with someone for 5 years and now they won't anymore. He was, as he would later understand, spectacularly wrong about almost everything. The car took Serena to a private airstrip 30 minutes outside the city. She didn't call anyone from the back seat. She didn't check her phone. She watched the buildings thin out and become warehouses and then became trees. And she breathed slowly through her nose the way she'd taught herself to breathe when she was 16 and furious and terrified and living in a compound in southern France with men who carried automatic weapons the way other men carry umbrellas. She thought about the first night she'd met Cale Ashcroft. Not their official introduction, the one at the Prentice Foundation Gala, where she'd been placed at his table specifically, where every detail had been arranged down to what she was wearing, but the real first time. 6 weeks before that. She'd been watching him from across a hotel bar in Geneva while he negotiated a real estate deal over drinks with three men from a Zurich holding company that Serena knew with absolute certainty was 6 weeks from financial collapse. She'd almost warned him. She hadn't. Because warning him would have meant explaining how she knew, and explaining how she knew would have required a conversation she wasn't ready to have with a stranger in a bar. So she'd said nothing, and the deal had collapsed, and the Ashcroft Group had hemorrhaged $40 million in a quarter. And by the time the arranged introduction happened at the Prentice Gala, Kael's father was desperate enough to consider a marriage alliance with a woman whose background nobody could quite verify. Serena had agreed to the arrangement, not because she needed the Ashcrofts, because she needed proximity to a city, a social class, and a set of financial networks that moved through Ashcroft's world the way blood moves through a body. She needed to be invisible in that world. And what made a woman more invisible than being a quiet, overlooked wife? 5 years. She'd found what she needed in 4. She'd stayed the extra year because Massimo had asked her to, and because she was not yet certain she'd found everything. The car pulled through a security gate onto a private tarmac. Serena got out and stood in the cold air, tilting her face up slightly, eyes closed for 3 seconds. An old habit. One of Massimo's men had taught her, before you step back into the life, breathe the outside air once. Remember what ordinary feels like because you won't feel it for a while. She opened her eyes. The tarmac was empty. She checked her watch. Then she heard it. The sound came from the east. A deep, low resonance that grew until it became something you felt in your chest before you properly heard it with your ears. Not one engine, multiple. The specific frequency of heavy, custom-fitted aircraft decelerating for a landing approach. The airstrip had no scheduled traffic. The gate guard had already stepped out of his booth and was shielding his eyes with his hand, turning to look at the sky with the confused expression of a man whose job description had never included anything like this. The first jet touched down without clearance. Black. Gold trim on the fuselage. A narrow line, understated, the kind of detail that costs more than most people earn in a year. It taxied to a stop with absolute precision, and the engines were still cycling down when the door opened and the steps unfolded. They came out in 2 columns, 40 men, maybe more. Dark suits, not the cheap kind, the kind that are tailored to accommodate what they're concealing underneath. They moved without rushing, without any wasted motion, fanning into a loose formation across the tarmac with the coordinated ease of people who have done this in 100 different airports on 4 different continents. The gate guard had his radio to his mouth and was speaking very quietly. Then, in what Serena would later describe to exactly no one as the single most theatrical moment of her entire life, every one of those men lowered their heads. Not a bow, deeper than that. The specific posture of people who are not accustomed to lowering their heads for anyone, doing it anyway, because this is one of the few people in the world for whom they would. A man stepped forward from the group, tall, silver-haired, the specific kind of handsome that belongs to men in their 60s who have never eaten badly or slept poorly because they have always had people to ensure both. He was wearing a charcoal coat and he was smiling, and the smile was the complicated kind, relief and reproach in equal measure. "Lady Serena," he said, "your father sends his car." His name was Renault. She'd known him since she was 19. He was the closest thing Massimo Draven had to a personal shadow, always present, never visible, unless you knew where to look. Serena let out one small breath. "How is he?" she asked. "Impatient," Renault said, "as always." "And the captain's?" A pause. Renault's expression shifted, barely, the way a pond shifts when something moves beneath the surface. "There are conversations happening, the kind that accelerate when they believe the succession is uncertain. They're going to be disappointed." "Yes," he said. "They are, yeah." 40 minutes later, Cale Ashcroft's phone rang. It was his security director, a former military man named Griggs, who had the irritating habit of calling with problems before he had solutions. Cale picked up because it was the 3rd call in a row. "What?" "There's footage from the Harlow airstrip. The private facility your wife—" A pause. "The facility listed under the family account." "What about it?" "Sir, you need to see this." Cale pulled up the security feed on his laptop. The timestamp read 47 minutes ago. The footage was grainy in the way all tarmac cameras are grainy, slightly washed out by the flat winter light. But you didn't need high resolution to understand what you were looking at. He watched the jet land. He counted the men. He watched Renault walk towards Serena, and he watched her say something to him, and he watched the entire formation move in orbit around her toward the waiting aircraft, with the comfortable precision of a group that had been doing exactly this for a long time. He watched until the steps folded up and the jet taxied back toward the runway. Then he sat in his chair for a long time without doing anything. His phone buzzed. A text from Mateo. Lachlan just canceled the 3 p.m. meeting. No reason given. Second major client to cancel this week. Cale set the phone down. He thought about the moment in the lobby, the pen moving across the paper, the way Serena had handed the folder back to him without making eye contact, the single carry-on bag, the coat buttoned against the cold. She hadn't been leaving. She'd been returning. His father came to the office at 6. Aldrich Ashcroft at 70 was still a man who entered rooms and waited for them to adjust to his presence rather than the other way around. He was wearing his usual dark suit, no tie, and he had the look he wore when he was managing something. Not panicked, not quite calm, but occupied. The internal expression of a man doing calculations. "You let her go," Aldrich said. "I asked her to go," Kyle said. "There's a difference." His father moved to the window and stood looking at the city below, with his hands clasped behind his back. "I've been hearing things." "What things?" "About the Veil woman. About who her family is." He turned. The calculation was still running behind his eyes, but something else had joined it. Something that Kyle could not immediately name, but that made him sit slightly straighter in his chair. "I should have done more research 5 years ago." "You did plenty of research. Apparently not the right kind." Aldrich came away from the window and sat in the chair across the desk, something he almost never did. Aldrich Ashcroft preferred to stand when he talked to his son, because height was a form of argument. The fact that he was sitting meant he wanted to be in the room a while. "There are names attached to that woman, Kyle. Names I've spent 30 years making sure I was never in the same room with." "What names?" His father looked at him, and for the first time that Kyle could clearly remember, Aldrich Ashcroft looked something very close to afraid. "The Black Dominion," his father said. The words landed in the room with the specific weight of something that meant nothing to Kyle and clearly meant everything to his father. "I don't know what that is," Kyle said. "No," Aldrich said. "You wouldn't." He straightened in the chair. "Because I made sure you never needed to." The calculation behind his eyes had stopped. In its place was the look of a man who has been carrying a very heavy thing for a very long time and has just heard footsteps approaching from a direction he wasn't watching. "Your wife," his father said slowly, "is not who you thought she was." Kyle thought about the footage from the tarmac. The 40 men, the lowered heads, Renault's silver hair against the gray winter sky. "No," Kyle said. "I'm starting to understand that." What he didn't say, couldn't say, because he didn't have the words for it yet, was what he was already feeling underneath the confusion and the something that was beginning to feel uncomfortably, like it might be regret. He had handed a woman a pen this morning, like she was a loose end he was cleaning up, and she had signed his papers the way a queen signs a decree, without looking at him, without needing his approval, without, it was now absolutely clear, needing him at all. 6,000 miles away, give or take, in a study lined with maps that had no labels and books that had no titles on their spines, an old man sat in a leather chair and read the message on the screen of an encrypted phone and allowed himself one slow smile. He was not young. He had not been young for a long time, but he had learned over the course of a life that most people would not believe if it were written down, that the best strategies are the ones that take years to fully execute, that patience is not passive, that watching is not the same as doing nothing. His name was Massimo Draven, and the woman who had just stepped off a jet onto his tarmac was not his biological daughter, but she was his. He had found her at 19, terrified and brilliant and carrying a grief she hadn't yet let herself feel, and he had understood immediately what she was, not what she could be made into, what she already was, underneath the fear. The phone buzzed again. "Renault, she's here. She looks well. She looks ready." Massimo set the phone on the table and looked at the map on the wall across from him, the one with the colored pins that meant things only he and 2 other people in the world fully understood. He pulled one pin from its current position and moved it 3 inches to the left. There were captains who thought this succession was uncertain. There were men inside his own organization who had spent the last 18 months building coalitions, making promises, shifting money into positions they believed would give them leverage when the moment came. They thought Serena was a liability, an outsider, a woman who'd spent 5 years playing house in Manhattan while the real work happened elsewhere. They were about to learn something important about the nature of camouflage, and about the particular danger of dismissing a woman who has been watching everything and saying nothing for longer than any of them realized. Outside, on the tarmac, Serena Vale walked through the doors and felt the familiar weight of the air inside the compound. The temperature kept slightly cool, the faint smell of cigarette smoke from Massimo's habit that no doctor had ever successfully argued him out of. And she let herself feel, for exactly 3 seconds, the thing she'd been holding at arm's length all morning. Not relief, not victory. Something older and more complicated than either. She was home, and the work, the real work, the thing she'd come back to finish, was just beginning. The compound at night was a different animal than the compound during the day. During the day it was controlled, guards rotating on schedule, vehicles moving in and out through the eastern gate with the predictable rhythm of a well-run operation, staff in the kitchens and the communications room and the training yard going about their work with the particular focus of people who understood that inattention had consequences. Massimo ran a tight house, always had. But at night the compound breathed differently. The lights in the upper corridor stayed on past midnight when Massimo couldn't sleep, which was most nights now. The guards on the south perimeter talked more quietly and watched the tree line more carefully. The captains who were staying in the east wing held conversations in rooms with the doors shut and their phones face down on the table, the way men talk when they're deciding things they don't want attributed to them later. Serena knew all of this because she had spent 4 years learning how this place worked before she'd ever left it. She'd walked those corridors at 3 in the morning when she was 22, memorizing which floorboards creaked, which guards were careless, which captains went to bed early, and which ones stayed up late nursing grudges. She had been a student of this house the way other women her age were students of universities. She hadn't forgotten any of it. She sat now in the chair by the window of her old room. Same chair, same window, the fabric on the armrest worn in the same spot where she used to grip it, and watched the east wing lights and counted the silhouettes moving behind the curtains. 3 of the captains were still awake. She could identify them by room. Voss in the corner suite, because Voss always took the corner suite at every property, and Massimo let him because it cost nothing to let a man believe his preferences matter. Caro 2 doors down, who would be on his 3rd drink by now, and would be feeling confident about things he shouldn't feel confident about. And Reuben Lane at the far end, whose light went on and off and on again in the pattern of a man pacing. Lane was the dangerous one, not because he was the most violent, Caro had that distinction without question, but because Lane was the most patient. He'd been with the organization for 19 years, and he had never once moved without calculating the angle. The fact that he was pacing meant something had disrupted his calculation. Her return, probably. Good. A knock at the door, 3 knocks, a pause, 2 more. Renault's pattern, unchanged from a decade ago. Come in, she said without moving from the chair. Renault entered and closed the door behind him with the care of someone who understood that sound traveled in old buildings. He was still in his coat from the airstrip, which meant he hadn't been to his own room yet, which meant he'd come to her first. Massimo wants to see you in the morning, he said. Breakfast, 6 o'clock. Not tonight? He said tonight you should sleep. A pause. He also said you won't sleep, but that you should have the option. That was Massimo, always accurate. What's the count? She asked, meaning the captains. Renault moved to stand beside the window, not at it. Beside it, out of the sight line, which was instinct with him as much as training. 7 present, 3 absent. Of the absent, 2 sent representatives and 1 sent nothing. Caro? Caro sent a bottle of wine and a card. Renault's expression remained neutral. The card said he was pleased to hear of her safe return. Of course it did. She looked back at the east wing lights. And the one who sent nothing? Benedek. She absorbed that. Felix Benedek was a captain who controlled 3 major transit corridors in the eastern region and who had, for the past 2 years, been making the kind of quiet lateral moves that look like consolidation until you see enough of them together and realize they look like something else. He was not someone you ignored. "He knows I'm here," she said. "Everyone knows I'm here." "Yes." So his silence is a statement. "Yes." She stood up from the chair. The movement was deliberate, not rushed. She'd learned early that rushed movements in this world read as weakness, even when you're alone. Maybe especially when you're alone. "I want a full rundown by 5:30. Every lateral move Benedek has made in the last 8 months, every captain he's met with privately, and any financial flows that move through his corridors that Massimo didn't authorize directly." "Already compiling," Renault said. "There's one item you should know about tonight." He reached into his jacket and produced a single folded paper, the old way, the way Massimo still preferred to move certain categories of information. "This came through the Athens channel 3 days ago. Massimo held it until you arrived." She unfolded it, read it once, then again. The paper contained 12 names. She knew 9 of them. Of the 9 she knew, 3 were dead and 2 were in prison. The remaining 4 she hadn't heard connected to each other in any combination that made sense. Until now. "Where did this come from?" she asked. "The source is someone inside the Voss network, someone who has been feeding information through Athens for about 4 months. This is the first time they've sent something at this level of specificity." "What do they want for it?" "Nothing yet, which is the part that concerns Massimo. A source who feeds information without asking for anything is either building to something large or is feeding you in a direction someone else has chosen for you." Neither option was comfortable. She folded the paper again and held it. "The 4 names I don't know. 2 are financial. 1 is political, mid-level, Ministry of Interior in one of the Baltic states. The 4th, Renault paused in the specific way he paused when something was going to be unpleasant. "The 4th is a name that Massimo recognized. He didn't tell me how." She looked at him. "He said he'd explain in the morning," Renault said. "I believe him, but I also believe it kept him awake last night." Very few things kept Massimo Draven awake. She handed the paper back to Renault and sat back down in the chair, not because she intended to sleep, but because her legs were tired from a longer day than most people would ever understand, and sometimes you sit down simply because your body needs the information that the ground is still there. "What's Lucian's position on all?" she asked. She kept her voice even when she said his name. She'd practiced that too. Renault was quiet for a beat longer than he needed to be. "Lucien has been present, engaged with the captains. He spent time with Voss this afternoon before you arrived, and with Lane yesterday. He's positioning. He would say he's mediating. He would." She looked at the window. "Where is he now?" "His suite. He retired early." Another of those careful pauses. "He asked about your flight." Serena said nothing for a moment. She thought about Lucien the way she always thought about Lucien, carefully, from a distance, the way you think about something that could be a threat or could be exactly what it appears to be, and the cost of being wrong in either direction is significant. Lucien Draven, Massimo's eldest, the one who had been here all along, who had never left, who had built his presence in this organization the way certain trees build root systems, slowly, quietly, too deep to see until you try to move them. She loved him. That was the complicated part. She loved him the way you love someone who was kind to you when kindness was in short supply, who taught you things you needed to know, who sat with you when the grief finally came and didn't try to fix it or move it along. But love and trust were not the same thing. She'd learned that lesson young. "Tell him I'll see him at breakfast," she said. "And Renault, don't tell him I asked about his movements." "Of course not." He moved toward the door. "Sleep, Serena. Even an hour." He left. She sat in the chair and watched the East Wing lights and thought about 12 names on a piece of paper and the particular texture of Renault's pause when she'd asked about Lucien, and she did not sleep. Breakfast was at 6, and Massimo was already at the table when she came down. He looked older. He looked older every time she saw him after an absence, and every time she had to recalibrate, not with grief exactly, but with the specific adjustment of someone watching a clock they don't want to watch. He was 71. He moved like a man of 60 on good days and like a man of 80 on bad ones, and this morning was somewhere in the middle. He stood when she entered, which he didn't have to do and which she knew he did because he wanted her to understand that nothing had changed between them. "Sit down," she said, because she couldn't watch him stand. "I stood for 30 years in rooms where I was the only one standing," he said. "I can stand for my daughter." She sat across from him, and they looked at each other in the way of people who have a great deal to say and have learned over time to say it in the right order. "You look tired," he said. "You look like you've been not sleeping for a week." 3 days. He sat, poured her coffee from the pot on the table the way he always had, which was his way of saying, "You are welcome here. You are still the person I made coffee for." "Tell me about the last year." "You had eyes on me." "I had eyes on the perimeter around you, not on you." He paused. "I respected the arrangement. You needed to do it your way." She drank the coffee. It was good. Massimo had always insisted on good coffee, said it was the only luxury he'd never apologized for. "I found 3 of the financial channels. I know about 2 of them. The third was newer, set up about 14 months ago through a shell structure in the Cayman branch. Someone moved money through Ashcroft Group's investment vehicle without Cale knowing. They used his company as a pass-through." Massimo's expression shifted. "Not much." "How much?" "Not the amount that matters, the destination." She set the cup down. "It ended up in a holding account connected to one of the names on that list you sent through Athens." His eyes sharpened. Even at 71, when Massimo's attention fully engaged, it was a physical thing. "Which name?" She told him. He was quiet for a long moment. Outside, the morning shift of guards was changing, and she could hear boots on gravel and the low exchange of the handoff. Normal sounds. Grounding sounds. "That name," he said finally, "belongs to a man I have not heard from in 25 years. He folded his hands on the table. "I believed he was dead." "He's not." "No." Massimo's voice was flat in the way of someone arriving at the end of a calculation they'd been running for a long time. "He's not." He looked at her. "Your parents knew him, before the end." She kept her face still. She was good at keeping her face still. "I know." "You knew before this?" "I suspected. I needed the financial trail to confirm." He studied her for a moment with the particular attention he gave to things he was deciding about. Then, "Lucien is going to push for a formal succession declaration within the week. He's been building toward it while you were gone. He has Voss and probably Caro." "Not Lane." "No. Lane is watching." Massimo's jaw tightened briefly. "Lane has been watching everything for a long time and never commits until he knows which way the weight is falling." "And Benedek?" A pause, the kind Massimo didn't usually have. "Benedek sent me a message yesterday," he said. "He said he would not attend the assembly." Another pause. "He said the matter of succession was already decided." The words sat between them. "He's already declared for someone," she said. "That's what it means." "If it's not you and it's not me, it's Lucien," Massimo said. She heard herself breathe. Just once, slower than usual. "Does Lucien know Benedek sent that message?" "I believe Lucien arranged for Benedek to send that message." She looked at her father. He looked back at her with eyes that were tired and clear and carrying something heavy that he had not yet put down, might not ever put down. "You're telling me this now," she said. "Not 6 months ago. Not when you first suspected." "I wanted to be certain." "And are you?" He didn't answer immediately. He looked at the table, at his hands. Massimo Draven's hands were the hands of a man who had built something from violence and held it together through decades of choices he would not unmake even if you gave him the chance, because unmake one and the structure falls, and the structure, whatever it was, had kept more people alive than the alternative. "I'm not certain about Lucien," he said quietly. "I'm certain about the money. I'm certain about Benedek. I'm certain about the name you found at the end of that financial trail." He looked up. "The rest?" He stopped. "You love him," she said. "He's my son." "And you love him." Massimo's face did something complicated and then stopped doing it. "Yes." She understood that. She didn't say so. Some things don't improve with being spoken aloud. "I need a week," she said, "before any formal assembly, before Lucien can force a declaration." I need 7 days and access to the archive records from 25 years back. What are you looking for? Proof. The kind that doesn't require anyone to take my word for it. He nodded once. You have the week. He reached across the table and closed his hand over hers briefly, the way he had when she was 19 and furious and sitting in the same room having a different but not entirely different conversation. Serena, be careful with him. I'm always careful. Not with him, Massimo said. You've never been careful with Lucien. She didn't argue. He was right. Lucien found her in the archive room at 11. She heard him on the stairs before he appeared in the doorway. He had always been light on his feet, but she'd been listening for him all morning, and her hearing, when she was paying attention, was very good. She didn't look up from the ledger she was reading when he came in. I didn't know you were back until last night, he said. I sent word through Renault. Word that you were arriving, not that you were here. He came into the room and stopped at the opposite side of the table, looking at her the way he'd been looking at her since she was 19, with an ease that might be genuine and might be performance, and she'd never been fully certain which. You look good, the outside world agreed with you. It was interesting. She turned a page. How's the organization? Complicated. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat without being invited, which was Lucien, always occupying the space he wanted to occupy, always making it feel natural rather than aggressive. He was 43, dark-haired like his father, with the particular stillness of someone who'd learned that stillness was more powerful than motion. The captains are restless. You know how it is when there's no clear line of succession. There's a clear line of succession, she said. Massimo named me. Massimo named you in a private conversation 2 years ago. That's not the same as a formal declaration before the council. He paused. Some of the captains feel the decision should go through proper channels. Some of the captains, she said, are having private meetings to decide how to position themselves before the proper channels happen. He smiled. Not a big smile. The particular small one he used when something she said impressed him. You've been back 12 hours. I've been paying attention for longer than that. He looked at the ledger she was reading. What are you researching? History. Any particular history? She looked up at him then, directly, for the first time since he'd entered the room. He met her eyes without flinching, which was consistent with either innocence or excellent control. The years before I came here, she said. Something moved in his expression. It was quick, gone almost before it arrived, and most people would have missed it. She didn't miss it. That was a long time ago, he said. 25 years. Why now? She held his gaze. Because I'm home now, and I want to understand everything about the house I'm living in. A beat of silence that lasted exactly as long as it needed to, and not 1 second more. Of course, Lucien said. He stood, straightened his jacket, in the unhurried way of a man who has decided this conversation is over on his terms. You should come to dinner tonight, all the captains who are in residence. It would be good for them to see you comfortable here. I am comfortable here. Then show them. He moved toward the door. At the threshold he paused, half-turned, the classic Lucien exit. Always one more thing, always delivered lightly. Don't spend all day in the archive. It's dark in here. He left. She sat very still until she heard his footsteps reach the bottom of the stairs. Then she reached into the ledger and carefully lifted the page she'd been holding in place with her left hand since he'd walked in. The page she had not let him see the title of. Internal Transfer Records, Black Dominion, year 23 through year 25. She'd found the first anomaly 3 hours ago. A series of disbursements, small ones, running through a subsidiary account over a 14-month period, signed with an authorization code she'd had to cross-reference twice before she understood what she was reading. The code belonged to an account that had been officially closed 18 months before the disbursements began. Someone had reactivated it without authorization. Someone who had access to the code. The list of people with access to that code in year 23 was 7 names long. 6 of those people were dead or accounted for. The 7th? Her phone buzzed. Renault, 1 floor up. Come to the security room, now. She closed the ledger, marked her page, and went upstairs. The Peace Summit had been Massimo's idea, arranged through the Athens channel with 2 of the smaller affiliated families as a show of continuity. Proof that the organization's operations were stable, regardless of internal succession questions. It was held in the main reception hall, a long room with high ceilings and the kind of furniture that communicates power without being obvious about it. 12 people total, 5 from their organization, including Serena, Renault, and 2 of the senior captains, and 7 from the 2 visiting families. It started at 3 in the afternoon. At 3:47, the man seated fourth from the left on the visiting side shifted in his chair. Serena saw it because she was watching everything. She had been watching everything for the entire 47 minutes, tracking the room the way Massimo had taught her when she was 20. Read every person at the table. Not their words. Their bodies. Words are chosen. Bodies are honest. The shift was small. Weight moving to the right. Shoulders dropping a quarter inch. It was the posture of someone about to act, bracing in the way the body braces before it commits to a direction. Her hand was already moving when he reached inside his jacket. She was out of the chair before anyone else in the room had processed what was happening. She moved left and then immediately right, off the predictable line, closing distance instead of creating it. Because at 10 feet a drawn weapon is dangerous, and at 2 feet it is manageable if you know what you're doing. She knew what she was doing. The gun came out of his jacket, and she was already on the inside of his arm. Her left hand locked his wrist in the specific grip that hyperextends the joint. Her right elbow came up hard against his forearm. The weapon hit the marble floor and she kicked it sideways, and then she had his arm behind his back and his face against the table, and the entire sequence had taken 4 seconds. The room erupted. She held him down with his arm at the angle that made movement impossible, and she was breathing hard, and she scanned the room because you always scanned for the second threat. Renault had his hand inside his jacket. Both senior captains were on their feet. 3 of the visiting delegation were standing with their hands visible and their faces showing the specific expression of people who genuinely had no idea this was coming. 3 were not showing that expression. She filed that away. The man under her hand was making small sounds of pain and trying to find a position that relieved pressure on his elbow. He wasn't finding one. "Who sent you?" she said. He didn't answer. "I'm going to ask you once more," she said, "and then Renault is going to take you to a room where the asking takes much longer." She pressed down slightly. "Who sent you?" He said a name. She had heard it before. On a list. Through an Athens channel. Connected to a financial trail that ended 25 years ago and a man Massimo had believed was dead. And connected. Through 3 degrees of separation, she had spent 5 years mapping to a reactivated authorization code in a ledger in the archive room downstairs. She stood up, stepped back, nodded to Renault. The room was still loud, but the loudness was happening at a distance she was no longer part of. She walked to the window while Renault's men secured the attacker, while the visiting delegation sorted itself into the guilty and the innocent, while the captains who had been present started the rapid calculation of what this meant for their positions and their loyalties and their survival. Outside, the compound grounds were gray and still in the afternoon light. She could see the south perimeter and the tree line beyond it, and somewhere beyond that the distance she had traveled to get here, and the distance she had yet to go. She thought about the archive room, about the 7th name on a list of 7. She thought about Lucien standing in the doorway this morning with his easy smile and his question, "What are you researching?" She thought about a man who had just tried to kill her using a name connected to money that had moved through channels only 7 people had ever had access to. 6 of those people were dead or accounted for. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She didn't look at it. Behind her, Renault said quietly, "Serena, there's something else." She turned. Renault was holding a second phone, but not his, the attacker's, already open to a message thread. He'd pulled it in the 30 seconds since she'd stepped away, which was why she trusted Renault with things she didn't trust to most people. "The last message," he said. "It came in 40 minutes before he moved. Someone inside this compound sent him a signal." She took the phone, read the message, the timestamp, the content, and at the bottom, the authorization signature that the sender had not thought to scrub because the sender had not expected the attacker to fail. The signature was a 6-digit code. She knew that code. She had seen it this morning, in a ledger, in an archive room, in the entry log for an account that had been officially closed 25 years ago and reactivated by someone with access. Massimo's voice came from the doorway behind her, quiet and terrible. "Serena." She turned. He was standing in the entrance to the reception hall with Lucien 3 steps behind him, And Massimo's face had the look of a man who has just been handed confirmation of something he had been praying was wrong. And Lucian's face had the controlled blankness of a man who has just realized that the room he walked into is not the room he expected. Their eyes met across the length of the hall. Lucian's were perfectly still. Serena held up the phone so he could see the screen. Something moved in Lucian's face. Not guilt, not yet, but the first hairline fracture in the controlled surface, the micro-expression of a man whose calculation has just encountered a variable he did not account for. Massimo said nothing. He was looking at his son. Outside, the afternoon light was failing, and the tree line was going dark, and somewhere in the distance beyond the compound walls, the world was continuing its business with complete indifference to the moment happening in this room. The moment where every relationship in this family had just changed shape permanently, irrevocably, beyond any negotiation or pretending, and there was not one of them standing in that hall who could go back to what they had been 1 hour ago. Nobody moved for 3 full seconds. That was how long it took for the room to process what it was looking at. A woman holding a dead man's phone with a 6-digit code on the screen. A father staring at his son across 40 feet of marble floor, and a son whose face had gone the particular careful blank of someone making very fast decisions about which version of this moment he could survive. Lucien moved first, not toward the door, not backward. He stepped forward into the room, hands open at his sides, the gesture of a man who wants to be read as unarmed. It was a good move. It said, "I'm not running. Running is what guilty people do." "What is that?" he said, directing the question at Serena, not at his father. That was also a choice. Massimo's presence in this room was the thing he needed to manage, and the way you manage a father is through the child. "You know what it is," Serena said. "I know what it looks like." He kept walking, unhurried, stopping at the midpoint of the room. "Someone used my authorization code. That doesn't mean—" "Your code was deactivated 18 months after you were assigned it," she said. "The account it belongs to was officially closed. Someone reactivated it 8 months ago." She held the phone steady. "The reactivation request came from a terminal inside this compound. The log shows a biometric confirmation." Lucian's jaw moved. "Just once." "Biometrics can be spoofed," he said. "Yes," she said. "They can." She looked at him. "But the secondary confirmation, the one this system requires because your father built redundancy into everything. The secondary confirmation requires a 12-character passphrase that exists in exactly one place." She paused. "The personal cipher key that Massimo gave to you on the day you were made operational. That your father generated specifically for you, that has never been stored digitally, that exists only in a physical document and in your memory." The room was completely silent. Massimo had not moved from the doorway. Lucien's hands were still open at his sides, but something had changed in the way he was holding them. The fingers slightly more spread, the tendons in the back of his hands slightly more visible. The body doing what it does when the mind is under pressure, and the performance is getting harder to maintain. "I want to see the log," he said. "I'll show you the log," Serena said, "and you can explain to your father why your passphrase appears in it. And while you're doing that, you can also explain the disbursements from year 23 through year 25 that were authorized through the same account. The ones that ended up connected to a name that your father believed was dead." She took one step toward him. "And then you can explain the man on the floor behind me who just tried to put a bullet in me, and who said that name when I asked him who sent him." Lucien looked at his father. Massimo had not moved. His face was the face of a man in the specific pain that has no clean category. Not grief exactly, not rage exactly, the thing that lives between them, where neither one has fully arrived and both are present at once. "Luke," Massimo said. That was all. And something in Lucien's face cracked. Not collapsed, cracked. A single visible line through the surface, like stress fracture in something that had been engineered to be strong and was strong, but had been under load for too long. He closed his eyes for 1 second, opened them. "You were never going to let me lead it," he said. His voice was different. The ease was gone. What was underneath was older and harder and had been living there for a long time. 20 years. 20 years I built this. I managed the captains. I ran the networks. I held the Eastern Corridor together. When it was falling apart, I was here. I was always here. And then you bring her in, and she's the heir. The last word came out with a weight that wasn't quite bitterness and wasn't quite grief, and was something in the register of both. She's been gone 5 years. She was never gone, Massimo said quietly. She was working. I was working. Not on the same thing. Lucien's mouth tightened. No, not on the same thing. He looked at Serena, and the look was complicated in a way she hadn't expected. There was anger in it, yes, and something that had curdled from love into something adjacent, but there was also something that looked painfully like it had once been genuine. I taught you things. When you came here. Do you remember that? I remember everything, she said. I taught you how to read a room, how to read a ledger. A pause. How to read a person. You did. And you used it. Yes. He nodded slowly, like he was confirming something he'd already known. The man who sent the attacker. You said a name. She didn't answer. Hadrian Voss, Lucian said. Not the captain in the corner suite. The original, the one who had died. The one who Massimo had believed was dead. Old Hadrian, you found the trail. 3 weeks ago. So you knew before you came back. I knew enough. His expression shifted again. And this time what came through was something unexpected, something that stopped her because she hadn't prepared for it. He looked, for one moment, genuinely relieved, as if something he'd been holding had been taken from him. Good, he said. Then, quieter. He's been holding that over me for 9 years. The room rearranged itself around those words. Serena heard herself say, What? The next 2 hours were the most complicated 2 hours of her life, and her life had not been short on complexity. They moved to Massimo's study. Massimo, Serena, Lucian, and Renaud. Because Renaud was the only other person in this compound that all 3 of them trusted, which was a statement about how few people that was. The captains were managed, told there had been a security incident, that it was contained, that the summit would resume in the morning. Caro asked questions. Voss was silent. Lane watched everything. In the study, with the door locked, Lucian talked. He talked for 90 minutes, and what came out was not the confession Serena had been prepared for. It was something more tangled, more human, and in some ways more damaging than a straightforward betrayal would have been. Hadrian Voss, not the dead one, the father, had been a founding architect of the Black Dominion's financial infrastructure. He had built the original account structures, the cipher key system, the authorization codes. He had done this in the organization's earliest years, when Massimo was building something from nothing and needed men who understood money at a level most criminal organizations never achieved. Voss had been that man. And Voss had, with extraordinary patience, built one additional thing into the infrastructure that no one else knew about. A secondary layer. A parallel set of accounts, authorization strings, and access points that mirrored the official system but reported to no one. A shadow architecture built inside the real one, invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. Voss had used it for years, skimming, redirecting, building a secondary fortune that existed entirely outside Massimo's oversight. When Massimo had finally moved against him, not knowing about the shadow architecture, thinking it was a simpler betrayal, Voss had staged his death. Had been living, Lucian said, in 3 rotating locations across the eastern Mediterranean for the past 2 decades. 9 years ago, Lucian had found out. Not by investigating. By accident. A name in a document that shouldn't have been there, a thread pulled that unraveled more than he'd expected, the way discoveries always work, the wrong kind of luck at the wrong time. Why didn't you tell me? Massimo said. His voice was even. That was how Massimo handled the things that broke him. He went very still and very even, like a man holding something fragile over a hard floor. Because of what he told me, Lucian said. A pause. He contacted me after I found the trail, before I could come to you. Lucian's hands were on his knees. He was looking at the table. He said he had documentation, the original records from 25 years ago, from the night Serena's parents were killed. The air in the room changed. Serena's hands were flat on the table. She could feel the wood grain under her palms. She focused on that. He said if I came to you, the documentation would be released to every crime family in Europe. Lucian finally looked up. His eyes went to Serena, not to his father. He said the documentation would prove that Massimo ordered the hit on your parents. The silence that followed was the loudest silence she had ever been inside. She looked at Massimo. Massimo's face had gone very still in the specific way of someone receiving a blow they have been waiting for and dreading, and the fact that they were waiting for it makes it no smaller. "It's not true," Massimo said. His voice was quiet, absolute. "I know," Lucian said. "Then why?" "Because he also had documentation that was true." Lucian's jaw worked. "About other things. About the early years. Things that would have done real damage. Not to your reputation, but to the structure, the alliances, the agreements, things that took decades to build." He paused. "I calculated that protecting the organization was worth managing Voss on my own." "For 9 years," Massimo said. "For 9 years. And the account reactivation, the money movements. He asked for access to the old infrastructure, told me it was archival. He wanted to move assets that were already in the system and couldn't be accessed any other way." Lucian's voice had the flat quality of someone who has spent years rehearsing an explanation and now hears how it sounds out loud. "I knew it wasn't only archival. I told myself it was manageable." Serena said, "The attacker today came through Voss." "Yes." "He tried to kill me." "I know." Lucian's voice cracked slightly on the second word. Just slightly. "I didn't know he was going to do that. I want you to understand that." "What did you think he was going to do?" she asked. Silence. "Lucien." Her voice was not loud. It was the voice she used when she needed a room to pay full attention. "What did Voss tell you he was going to do?" He looked at her with the expression of a man who has just understood that the bottom he thought he'd reached was not the bottom. "He said he was going to send someone to give you a message," Lucian said, "to make clear that your return complicated things. That the safer outcome for everyone was a quiet succession, me in the formal role, you in an advisory capacity, Voss's shadow access maintained under the existing arrangement. A message," she said. "That's what he said. With a gun. I didn't know You didn't know because you chose not to know." She stood up. The chair moved back and the sound of it was sharp in the quiet room. "You told yourself it was manageable. You told yourself you were protecting the organization. And you handed a man who has been running a shadow empire inside your father's house for 25 years the access code he needed to try to have me killed on the day I came home." She looked at him, and what she felt was not the clean anger she would have preferred. What she felt was the ragged, exhausting thing you feel when someone you love does something you can't fully hate them for because you understand every single choice that led to it. "I'm not saying you planned it, I'm saying you built the conditions for it and called it management." Lucian said nothing. Massimo stood. He moved to the window, stood with his back to both of them, looking out at the compound he had built, his hands behind his back, and for a long time no one spoke, and the only sound was the compound settling around them, the way old buildings settle, the sounds of weight being distributed. "Where is Voss now?" Massimo said. "I have a location," Lucian said. "One of 3. I can narrow it." "Do it." Massimo turned. His face had resolved into something. Not calm, but decided. The way a face looks when the calculating has finished. "Tonight." "And Lucien." He looked at his son with the particular look of a man who loves someone and is not going to let that love change what comes next. "When this is over, you and I are going to talk about what 9 years of managed secrets costs." Lucien nodded. Massimo looked at Serena. "I need to tell you something. Something I should have told you years ago." He moved back to the table and sat down, and she had never seen him sit with quite that particular weight, as if the chair were the only thing holding the decision upright. "The night your parents died. I wasn't there, but I knew it was going to happen." The words landed like something dropped from a height. "Not in time to stop it," he said. "Understand that. By the time I knew, the order was already moving. I had 40 minutes and I used them to get you out. You were 17. You were in the east wing of that house, and I sent Renaud. You remember. You've always remembered Renaud appearing that night, and you've always wondered why he was there." His hands were flat on the table. "He was there because I sent him. Because what I could save was you." She was standing very still. "The order didn't come from me," Massimo said, "but I knew whose order it was. And I made a decision. The same kind of decision Lucien made 9 years ago, for 9 years. I decided that confronting that person directly would destroy more than it saved, That I could protect you better from inside the structure than by tearing it down to get to one man. She heard herself say, "Who?" "You already know," Massimo said. She did. She had known since the ledger, since the authorization code, since the name at the end of the financial trail that ran from a Cayman shell through an Ashcroft investment vehicle, through 3 degrees of separation to an account reactivated with a passphrase only Lucian possessed, but that Lucian had been given access to by someone who'd built the original system, someone who'd had access before anyone else, someone whose architecture ran under everything. "Voss ordered my parents killed," she said, "to eliminate the only 2 people in the organization who had found the shadow infrastructure," Massimo said. "Your father had been investigating financial anomalies for 8 months. He was close. Voss moved first." She sat back down, not because her legs gave out, because she needed to be at the table to say the next thing and have it be heard the way she needed it to be heard. "You kept me here," she said. "You raised me. You taught me everything about this organization, and you always knew, that the man who killed my parents was still alive, still inside the infrastructure." She looked at Massimo. "And you let me spend 5 years in a marriage you arranged." "I did not arrange your marriage," Massimo said sharply. "That was Voss. The Ashcroft connection was Voss, sect. I found out 2 years after you were already in it." She stopped. "What?" "The introduction to Kyle Ashcroft," Massimo said. "The gala placement, the background arrangement, the family that was suddenly available and interested in an alliance. I believed it was my network. It wasn't." His voice was steady, but the steadiness was costing him. "Voss placed you with the Ashcroft family because Aldrich Ashcroft has been a silent investor in Voss's shadow accounts for 30 years. He wanted you where Aldrich could watch you, where you were domesticated, contained." She heard the word contained and felt something in her chest do something she wasn't going to let happen in this room. "Kael's father," she said, "has been funding the man who killed your parents since before you were born," Massimo said. "And I believe, though I cannot yet prove, that Aldrich Ashcroft knew what the money was being used for." The compound was quiet around them. The evening shift had started outside, and the guards were on their rotation, and the world was continuing its business the way it always did, with complete indifference to the moments that rearranged everything. Serena sat at the table and looked at the grain of the wood and thought about 5 years in a glass-walled apartment in Manhattan, about lobby floors and a pen and papers signed without a tear, about a man watching her from a second-floor railing as she walked out, about a marriage she had believed was her own choice to enter and her own choice to leave. She thought about Kyle, about his face when he'd handed her the papers, about the footage she'd been shown of him watching the airstrip security feed, about Renault's assessment, "He's been looking," about the fact that a man whose father had helped fund the murder of her parents had spent 5 years beside her without knowing it, and was now, according to the last intelligence report, pulling at financial threads that led places Aldrich Ashcroft did not want pulled. Her phone buzzed. She looked at it. The message was from a number she didn't recognize. 7 words. "They know you found the account. Move now." She turned the phone face down and looked at Massimo. "We need to move the timeline," she said. "How fast?" "Tonight." She looked at Renault, who had been standing near the door for the entire conversation with the expression he wore when he was memorizing everything. "I need Kyle Ashcroft brought in. Not contacted. Brought in. He's either already a target or he's about to become one, and either way he's the only person outside this compound who has seen any portion of the financial trail from the Ashcroft side." She paused. "And he won't come willingly." "No," Renault agreed. "He won't." "Then we don't give him the option." She stood, looked at Lucian. "I need the 3rd location, the one you're least certain about." Lucian frowned. "Why the least certain?" "Because Voss knows you have a location. He built the system. He knows the vulnerabilities. The location he fed you will be the most convincing one. The one you're least sure about is the one you found on your own." She held his gaze. "Am I wrong?" A pause. "No," Lucian said. "You're not wrong." She nodded. "Then we have until morning." She walked to the door. Her hand on the frame, she stopped. Not because she was uncertain, but because she needed Massimo to hear the next thing directly. "When this is finished," she said, not turning around, "I want every record from the shadow infrastructure, everything Voss built, everything that runs under this organization that I don't have complete visibility into." She paused. And I want to know if there are other things you've decided I didn't need to know about. Massimo said, yes. One word. He understood what it meant. She walked out. Well, the night outside the compound was cold and extremely dark, the kind of dark that happens when you're far enough from a city that the sky is allowed to be what it actually is. She walked the south perimeter, not for security. Renault had that. But because she needed to move, because her body had absorbed more in the past 6 hours than it knew how to hold still with. She had been placed. That was the thing she kept returning to. Not the betrayal of it, not the anger of it. Those were there. They would be there for a long time. But the specific mechanical reality that every choice she thought she had made freely over the past 5 years had been made inside a frame built by someone else. The gala, the introduction, the marriage, even the decision to leave. She had believed it was hers, had believed she was choosing the moment, had signed those papers with the clean feeling of someone completing a plan. But Voss had known she would leave eventually, and Voss had Aldrich watching, and Aldrich had reported, and the attacker today had not been improvised. It had been waiting. It had been waiting for her to come home, for her to start pulling at the threads, for the moment when she became more dangerous out here than she had been contained in Manhattan. She stopped at the south wall and put her hand flat against the stone, which was cold and rough and real. The question was not what had been done to her. The question was what she was going to do now, with a father who had kept secrets to protect her and broken her in a different way by doing it, with a brother who had kept a worse secret and built a monster with his silence, with a dead man who wasn't dead, and a living man who didn't know yet that his father had paid for her parents' graves, and a timeline that had just collapsed to hours. Her phone buzzed again. Same number. Cale Ashcroft is at LaGuardia, boarding a flight to Lisbon. Someone tipped him. She stared at the message. Then she called Renault. He picked up in one ring. He's moving, she said. Someone told him to run. Voss? Or Aldrich? She pushed off the wall. Either way, he's heading toward the same part of the world we're going to, which means he's either running toward us or running into something worse. She started walking back toward the compound. Get the jet ready. And Renault, I need body armor. 2 sets. 2. I'm going to need someone who knows the Ashcroft financial architecture from the inside. Someone who has seen the accounts that Aldrich kept private. She paused. Cale has seen them. He doesn't know what he's seen yet, but he's seen them. And I need him alive and in the same room as what's coming. And if he won't cooperate? She thought about a lobby, about marble floors and a pen moving across paper, about a man who had looked at her for 5 years and seen nothing, and who was now apparently running through an airport at whatever hour it was in New York toward a continent where people were actively trying to end both of their lives. He'll cooperate, she said. He just doesn't know that yet. She went back inside. The compound hummed around her, the machinery of something very old and very complicated continuing to operate while the people who ran it sorted out what was true, what had always been true, and what was going to happen next because of it. In his study, Massimo Draven opened a drawer he rarely opened and took out a small glass and a bottle he kept for occasions he hoped would never come, and poured one measure and sat alone with what he now knew his silence had cost the person he loved most in the world. In the East Wing, Lucian sat on the edge of his bed with his hands between his knees and his eyes on the floor and the look of a man calculating, not strategy this time, but damage, the specific accounting of what 9 years of convinced himself it was fine had actually done to the people around him, and finding the number larger than he'd been letting himself believe. And on the tarmac, the jet was fueling. And somewhere over the Atlantic, Cale Ashcroft sat in economy class with a carry-on bag and a laptop full of financial records. He didn't fully understand yet, watching the dark water 30,000 feet below him and feeling, for the first time in his adult life, the specific vertigo of a man who has just realized that the ground he built everything on was never solid to begin with. Cale had been in Lisbon for 11 minutes when they found him. He knew they were there before he saw them. The specific feeling of being watched that he'd spent his entire adult life ignoring because his entire adult life had been the kind of life where no one had reason to watch him, and now every nerve in his body was making up for lost time. The cafe near the airport where he'd stopped to use the Wi-Fi and figure out his next move had 4 exits. He'd counted them without knowing why. He knew why now. 2 men by the front entrance, one at the counter who hadn't ordered anything. One outside the window to his left, facing the street but not watching the street. 4 men. Professional spacing. The particular patience of people who've done this before and know their target has nowhere to go. He closed the laptop. Didn't rush it. Moving fast was the thing that made them move fast, and he needed 30 more seconds to decide which exit was least covered. His phone rang. Unknown number. He picked up because the alternative was 4 men and a cafe with no plan. "Don't go for the side door," Serena said. "There are 2 more in the alley." He said nothing for a moment. The sound of her voice was so specifically not what he'd been expecting that his brain needed a beat to process it. "There's a car at the northeast corner," she said. "Gray, running. Walk to it." "Walk to it," he repeated. "The men in the cafe work for Hadrian Voss. The car works for me." A pause. "You have about 90 seconds before they decide you've been on the phone too long." He stood up, put the laptop under his arm, walked toward the northeast corner of the room like a man who knows where he's going, which was the most important part of moving through a room full of people who are waiting for you to run. The gray car was there. The back door opened from the inside before he reached it. He got in. Renault was driving. A woman he didn't know was in the passenger seat with a phone to her ear. The car was moving before he closed the door. He turned around and looked through the rear window. The man from the counter was outside the cafe now, phone to his ear, watching the car pull into traffic with the expression of someone reporting a problem upward. "Where are we going?" Kyle said. "Somewhere safe," Renault said. "That's not an answer." "It's the only one I have right now," something it had never done before. A specific rapid heaviness that he recognized from nothing in his previous experience, because his previous experience had not included being extracted from a cafe in Lisbon by the staff of his ex-wife's criminal empire. He breathed through his nose, counted to 4, let it out. "She's already there?" he said. "She'll meet you at the location." "What location?" Renault glanced at him in the rear view. "Mr. Ashcroft, with respect. You got on a plane with a laptop full of financial records that connect your father to a man who has been trying to stay dead for 25 years. You walked into an airport that was being watched. You chose a cafe that was already compromised." A pause. "You are not currently in a position to be asking questions about location security." Cale looked out the window at Lisbon going past. The white buildings, the particular quality of late morning light on old stone, the trams and the tourists, and the ordinary world continuing to be ordinary around a car that contained something very far from ordinary. "My father," he said. "How long have you known?" About Aldrich Ashcroft's involvement? Serena identified the connection 3 weeks ago. The full depth of it. Renault stopped. "She'll explain. It's her information to give." He didn't push. He sat in the back seat with his laptop and his carry-on, and the specific cold feeling of a man who is beginning to understand that the history he thought he knew, his family, his company, his life, has a second floor he was never told about, and the second floor is where everything that actually mattered was happening. The location was a safe house 40 minutes outside the city, up a hill road that got narrower the higher it went, with a view of the estuary that would have been beautiful under different circumstances. Stone building, 2 stories, older than anything Cale owned in New York. Serena was already inside. She was standing at a table in the main room when he came through the door, looking at a spread of documents that covered the entire surface. She didn't look up immediately. She finished reading whatever she was reading, made a mark on a page, and then looked up. She looked tired. Not the soft tiredness of jet lag, the deep structural exhaustion of someone who has been running on focus and decision for too long, and is holding it together through the specific discipline of people who know they cannot afford to stop yet. She looked, he thought, with some part of his brain that had terrible timing, like someone he had never actually looked at. "Sit down," she said. He sat. The woman from the car's passenger seat put a coffee in front of him without being asked and disappeared into the other room. Serena moved 3 documents to his side of the table. "These are financial records from the Black Dominion's shadow infrastructure," she said. "Specifically from the accounts managed by Hadrian Voss over a period of approximately 28 years. She tapped the first document. "This is the initial capitalization of those accounts. The founding investors. Look at the 4th name." He looked. He looked for longer than he needed to, because seeing a thing and accepting that you're seeing it are 2 different processes, and the second one takes time. His father's name. Not a shell company. Not a nominee. His father's name. in a typeface that was unfamiliar but a signature that was not, because he had seen that signature on documents his entire life. He's been funding Voss's shadow account since before I was born, Kyle said. Yes. For how long? The earliest record we have is 31 years ago. She sat down across from him. Look at the second document. The second document was a disbursement record. The date at the top was 25 years ago. The recipient account matched a code that meant nothing to him, but a margin notation in what he was beginning to understand was Voss's handwriting gave a brief description of the purpose. Elimination. Bauer Vale Assets. Payment received. AA. AA. Aldrich Ashcroft. Cale set the document down. He did it carefully because the alternative to doing it carefully was doing something else, and this was not the moment for something else. Vale, he said. Bauer Vale. My parents' names, Serena said. My mother's family name was Bauer. They were both senior figures in this organization. My father had been investigating financial anomalies for 8 months. He had found evidence of the shadow infrastructure. She held his gaze. Voss ordered them killed to protect the accounts. Your father paid for it. The room was quiet except for sounds from the other room. Papers, someone moving, the low frequency of a radio. He didn't know I was your wife, Cale said. It came out flat. Not as a defense, as a piece of logic he was working through in real time. He couldn't have known. The marriage was Voss's arrangement, she said. Your father didn't engineer it, but when Voss told him who I was and who my parents were, he didn't warn you. He watched. She paused. He watched for 5 years. Cale's jaw tightened. He could feel his pulse in his temples. Why are you telling me this here? He said. Why now? Why not? Because Voss knows you've been pulling the financial threads. Because someone in your father's network tipped the cafe in Lisbon. Because you're a target now, whether you want to be or not. And the only way you survive the next 48 hours is if you understand exactly what you're inside. She leaned forward slightly. And because I need what's on that laptop. He looked at the laptop on the table beside him. What do you think is on it? He said. The Ashcroft Group's private investment records from the last 10 years. Specifically, the anonymous capital injections that kept your company solvent during 3 separate financial crises. Funds that came from Voss's shadow accounts through your father's nominee structure. She held his eyes. You've been running on blood money, Cale. Not knowingly, but running on it. He sat back. The chair was hard and the room was cold in the way stone rooms are cold, and outside the window the estuary was silver and indifferent. You knew this when we were married, he said. I suspected the financial connection, not the full depth. And you stayed. I was working. On this, she said. He absorbed that. The 5 years, the lobby and the papers and the pen moving across the signature line. All of it existing inside a context he hadn't known existed, which did not make it less real but made it differently real. The way a photograph of a place looks different once you understand what was happening just outside the frame. What do you need from the laptop? He said. She told him. He opened it. Well, they worked for 3 hours. Not together, exactly, side by side, with the specific functional proximity of people who have something urgent in common and are setting everything else aside in service of it. Cale pulled records. Serena cross-referenced them against the documents from the shadow infrastructure. The woman from the car, her name was Cass. She had the focused quiet of someone who processes information very fast, ran the cross-matches through an encrypted analysis system on her own machine. What assembled itself over those 3 hours was a map, not geographic, financial, a network of accounts, transfers, nominee structures, and authorization strings that showed, in the specific cold language of numbers and dates and coded references, the skeleton of a parallel organization that had been running inside the Black Dominion for nearly 3 decades, funded partly by Voss's own redirected assets, funded partly by Aldrich Ashcroft and 3 other named investors who appeared in the earliest capitalization records, managed through the shadow infrastructure that Voss had built when he'd built the official one, and that nobody had found because nobody had known to look for a system that mirrored the real one from inside. And at the center of it, not hidden, not encrypted, sitting in the records with the confidence of something that had never expected to be found, a property record, a fortress, privately owned, registered through a Portuguese holding company that traced back 3 steps to one of Voss's nominee structures, located on a cliff top on the southern coast overlooking the Mediterranean. Purchased 11 years ago, listed as a private residential holding, currently occupied according to a utility record from 6 weeks ago. Serena looked at the address for a long time. "He's been here the whole time," she said, not to anyone specifically. "In Portugal?" Kyle said. 200 kilometers south of where we're sitting." She picked up her phone and called Renault. When he picked up, she gave him the address and said, "How fast can you have the team there?" Renault's answer made her close her eyes for exactly 2 seconds. 6 hours, she said. "Then we go at dawn." She hung up. Kale was looking at the property record on the screen. "He's going to know we're coming." "Yes." "Then why Because he's also going to know that we have everything. The full record, every account, every transfer, every name." She closed the laptop. "A man like Voss has spent 25 years being invisible. The thing he cannot survive is being seen, and he knows that the moment this goes to every crime family in Europe, every government intelligence contact Massimo has, every—" She stopped. Her phone was buzzing. Renault again. She picked up. She listened for 14 seconds. The expression on her face during those 14 seconds was the thing Kyle would think about later, when he had distance, not fear, not shock, but the specific controlled stillness of someone receiving devastating information and choosing, in real time, not to be destroyed by it. She hung up. "What?" he said. "Massimo was poisoned 2 hours ago," she said. "At the compound. He's alive. Barely." The room went very cold. "Voss?" Kyle said. "Someone at the compound. Someone who had access to his food." She was already standing, moving to the door. "Lucien is managing the medical situation. Renault says it's a slow-acting compound, bought time. But if Massimo doesn't receive specific treatment in the next—" She stopped, breathed. "Voss has the antidote. He's used this particular compound before. He'll have it at the fortress." "That's why he's waiting," Kyle said. "He's not running. He's using Massimo to bring you to him." "I know." "It's a trap." She turned and looked at him with the particular directness she used when she needed someone to hear exactly what she was saying and not what they were afraid of. "Yes," she said. "I know that too." "Then you're not—" "I'm going anyway." She picked up her jacket. "Stay here. Cass will—" "No." He stood. She stopped. "I'm not staying here," he said. "My father's name is in those records. His money paid for your parents." He held her gaze. The thing he felt was not clean. It was the complicated, uncomfortable weight of someone who has just understood that their inherited life is not innocent and that the only available response to that understanding is to do the next right thing, however late. "I'm not asking to be useful. I'm telling you I'm coming." She looked at him for a long moment. "You've never fired a weapon," she said. "No." "You've never been in a building where people are trying to kill you." "I was in a cafe in Lisbon 40 minutes ago." "That was a surveillance situation. This will be—" She stopped. Something moved in her expression, brief and complicated. "Different." "I know." She studied him, the specific, unsentimental assessment of someone deciding whether a variable is a liability or a resource. "You stay behind Renault's team," she said. "You do exactly what you're told, when you're told. You don't make decisions independently." She turned back toward the door. "And if I tell you to get down, you get down." "Understood." "And Kyle," she paused at the door without turning, "if we get to the other side of this, you and I are going to have a different conversation. About everything." "Yes," he said. "We are." The fortress was exactly what the property record had suggested, and significantly worse in person. Clifftop, yes. Overlooking the Mediterranean, yes. But the record had not conveyed the way it sat on the rock, not perched, embedded, the stone of the building growing out of the stone of the cliff, as if it had always been there, which maybe it had, or maybe Voss had spent a significant amount of money making it look that way. Either way, the approaches were 3. The main road from the north, a coastal path along the cliff face from the east, and the water to the south, which was not a realistic approach unless you wanted to climb 70 feet of wet rock in the dark. Renault's team came in from north and east simultaneously, 6 on each line, Time to arrive at the outer perimeter within 15 seconds of each other. Serena was with the North group. Kyle was 3 steps behind her and not happy about it, but had made a commitment and was keeping it. The outer gate was open, not forced, open, swung wide with the specific deliberateness of an invitation. Renault raised his fist and the team stopped. He scanned. Radio contact with the East group clear. He looked at Serena. "He wants us inside," she said quietly. "I know." "He has the antidote." "I know." Renault looked at the open gate. "We go in with the understanding that this building is designed by a man who built parallel systems for 30 years. Anything that looks like a clear path is a managed path." "Yes." "And we go anyway." "We go anyway." They went through the gate. The courtyard was empty and lit from above by portable arc lights. Someone had installed them recently, the kind of operational lighting that transforms a space for a specific purpose. In this light, the courtyard was too visible, every shadow eliminated, which meant anyone inside the building had perfect sight lines on everyone crossing the stone. Serena moved fast and low across the courtyard, using the variance of the stone surface and the placement of an old well as cover. And Kale moved with her because moving with her was the only operational decision that made sense when you were a real estate developer in a Portuguese fortress at 4 in the morning. They reached the main entrance. The doors were open. Inside, the fortress was warmer than the night air and smelled of stone and something chemical, faint, that Serena identified without slowing. Accelerant. Someone had prepared this building to burn. "He's going to light it," she said to Renault. "When?" "When he has what he needs from this conversation." She moved through the entrance hall. "He wants to talk first. Voss always wanted to talk." "How do you know that?" "Because he's had 100 opportunities to simply destroy things, and he's always chosen architecture over demolition." She looked at the staircase ahead. "He built a shadow empire instead of burning the real one. He poisoned Massimo instead of shooting him. He placed me in a marriage instead of eliminating me." She started up the stairs. "He's a man who prefers arrangements to conclusions. He'll want to tell me how clever the arrangement was before he concludes it." At the top of the stairs, a corridor. At the end of the corridor, a door with light under it. Renault's hand on her arm. She looked at him. "The East team found 2 bodies," he said quietly. "Outer perimeter guards. Not ours. His own men." She absorbed that. "He killed his own guards," she said. "Yes. He's alone in there." "We believe so." An old man who had been hiding for 25 years, who had just poisoned the most powerful man in the European criminal world, who had killed his own guards and opened his own gates. A man who had decided this was the last arrangement. She reached the door, her hand on the handle. She looked back at Kyle. He was 3 steps back, pale in the way of someone who is afraid and is not hiding it, which was honest, and she found honesty useful right now. "Stay in the corridor until I call you," she said. He nodded. She opened the door. Hadrian Voss was 74 years old and looked like someone had compressed a decade into the last few months and applied it all to his face. I was seated at a desk, a beautiful desk, old walnut, the kind of thing a man acquires to communicate permanence. And he was looking at her with the specific expression of someone who has been waiting a very long time and is genuinely glad the waiting is over, which was the most unsettling thing about him. "Serena," he said, "you look like your mother." She closed the door behind her. "The antidote," she said, "on the desk." He nodded at a small case, medical, hard-sided. "Untouched. I'm not trying to negotiate with Massimo's life." "Then what are you negotiating with?" He smiled. It was a tired smile, the smile of a man near the end of a very long project. "Nothing. I'm done negotiating." He gestured at the chair across from him. "Sit." "I'll stand." "You'll sit," he said pleasantly, "because if you're going to hear what I'm going to tell you and have it actually land the way it needs to land, you'll want to be sitting." She sat. He looked at her for a moment with something that was almost, not affection, something adjacent to it, the feeling you develop for someone you've watched for a long time and cannot fully reduce to a piece in your strategy because they keep doing things that surprise you. "I killed your parents," he said, with no preamble. "I know. I did it to protect something I'd spent 15 years building. I know that too." "What you don't know," he said, is that I've spent the last 8 years trying to find a way to end this that doesn't require killing you. She was quiet. You were never supposed to be in Massimo's house, Voss said. When he took you in, I was concerned. He'd lost your parents and taken in their daughter, which was the kind of sentimental move I'd never seen from him before and didn't know how to calculate. He folded his hands. When you left for New York, I was relieved. I thought perhaps you'd simply live your life. People do sometimes. Even people who have reasons not to. I'm not here to live my life, she said. No, I understand that now. He reached into the desk drawer. Her hand moved. A photograph, he said. Just a photograph. He placed it on the desk and slid it across to her. She looked at it. It was a photograph of two people, young, early 20s, maybe younger. A man and a woman laughing at something outside the frame of the picture. The specific, unposed laughter of people who don't know they're being photographed. The man had dark hair and a familiar angle to his jaw. The woman had her mother's eyes. Her mother's eyes because it was her mother. 20 years younger, maybe more, before Serena existed. And the man beside her was Hadrian Voss. Young Voss, before the gray, before the decades, before everything that had happened to make him what he became. We were together, he said quietly, for 2 years. Before she met your father, before any of this. He looked at the photograph. I loved her. In the way you love someone when you're young and you believe that feeling is permanent and you don't yet understand that circumstances are not obligated to honor what you feel. She looked up from the photograph. I'm not telling you this for sympathy, he said. I'm telling you because you deserve to know that when I made the decision I made 25 years ago, I was not indifferent. I was not... He stopped. His jaw worked. It was the hardest thing I have ever done, and it was still wrong, and I have known it was wrong for every one of the 25 years since. The room was very still. Outside she could hear the compound, Renault's team moving through the lower level, the sound of the sea beyond the cliff, the indifferent, enormous sound of water. The antidote, she said. Take it. He pushed the case across. I told you, I'm not negotiating. She stood, picked up the case. Her hands were steady, which took work. Then what is this, she said. This is me finishing it. He reached into the desk drawer again, and this time she let him because she'd already clocked his threat level, and it was not 0, but it was not the priority right now. He placed a drive on the desk. Small. Encrypted, probably, but Cass would handle that. Everything, the complete archive. Every record from the shadow infrastructure, every transaction, every name, including the ones I kept out of the accounts I let Lucian access. He looked at her, including your parents' investigation, the complete record of what they found. They were close to everything, Serena. They had the whole map. What they found is on that drive. She looked at the drive. Why? She said. Because I'm tired, he said simply. And because the one thing I owe your mother, the absolute last thing I can give her daughter, is the truth about what she found and why it mattered enough to die for. She picked up the drive. At that moment, the window behind Voss exploded inward. Not glass. The frame, the stone around it, a concussive blast that came from the cliff face and hit the room like a fist. She was moving before the sound registered, behind the desk and down, the case and the drive both in her hands, ears ringing, eyes adjusting to the new dark because the lights had gone with the blast. She heard Voss hit the floor. She heard Renault in the corridor, his voice, not a shout, the controlled rapid communication of someone running toward a problem. She heard something else. In the corridor outside the door, a different set of footsteps. Not Renault's team, wrong cadence, wrong weight distribution. And Cale's voice, sharp, hey! Then a sound that was not a voice. She was through the door in 2 seconds. The corridor was dark and there were 2 men she didn't recognize, and Kale was on the floor with blood on the left side of his face, and one of the men had a weapon trained at the door she'd just come through, and the other was raising his toward her, and she was already inside his reach, the way she'd been inside the attacker's reach at the summit, and the move was the same move her body knew without asking her brain about it. But this man was larger and faster than the man at the summit, and she felt the impact in her shoulder when his elbow connected, and it was the kind of impact that takes something offline temporarily, not permanently, but the temporarily mattered right now because the other man was turning, and she had perhaps 2 seconds before his angle was clean. Renault came through the stairwell door at a dead run with 2 of his team, and the corridor collapsed into motion and noise, and the specific chaos of a confined space with too many people, all making rapid decisions about direction and force. And Serena took the second man's weapon at the cost of her right knee connecting with the stone floor. Hard enough that the pain went white for a moment. And then Renault's team had both of them, and it was over, as suddenly as it began, the way violence always ended. Not with conclusion, but with a sudden absence of motion that felt more like interruption than resolution. She got up. Her knee was wrong, not broken, but wrong, the specific wrong of something that had been forced past its range and was communicating displeasure loudly. She ignored it. Cale was sitting up against the wall. The blood on his face was from a cut above his eye, not deep, the kind that bleeds aggressively because of the location and looks worse than it is. He was pressing the back of his hand against it and looking at her with an expression that was complicated and exhausted and something else she didn't have time to catalog. "You're hurt," he said. "I'm functional," she said. "That's not... Are you functional?" He looked at his hand, at the blood, pressed harder. "Yeah." "Then we move." She looked at Renault. "Who sent them?" Renault looked at the two secured men on the floor, then at her. "Not Voss." "I know." She looked back at the door to the study. "Check on him." Renault went in, came back in 6 seconds. "He's gone." She absorbed that, the blast from the window. Not an accident, not Voss. Someone else, someone who had been waiting outside the cliff face, had sent a shaped charge through the window specifically timed to eliminate Voss in the moment he had decided to become a witness. Someone who needed him silent. Someone who had known exactly where Voss was and exactly what he was about to hand over. She looked at the drive in her hand. She looked at the case with the antidote. She thought about Aldrich Ashcroft, in New York, who had watched her for 5 years, who had paid for her parents 25 years ago, who had a son currently sitting against a stone wall in a Portuguese corridor, bleeding above his left eye. She thought about the message that had tipped Kyle to get on the plane. Someone inside Kyle's world had moved him like a piece. Someone who wanted him here, in this building, accessible. Not to her. Her phone buzzed. She looked at it. A message from a number she'd never seen, untraceable, the kind of routing that costs serious money. "You have what you need. But so do I. Come home, Serena. Bring my son. Or the antidote in your hand is the only one that exists, and Massimo dies before morning." She looked at the message for 4 seconds. Then she looked at Kyle. He was reading her face. He'd learned to do that, apparently, somewhere in the last several hours. And what he read there made him get to his feet despite the cut in the wall and the everything else. "What?" he said. She held up the phone so he could read the screen. His face went through several things in rapid succession. At the end of the sequence, it arrived at a stillness that was different from shock. It was the stillness of someone who has just understood something completely and is deciding what to do with the understanding. "My father," he said. "Yes." He looked at the message for another moment. Then he looked at her, not with the expression of a man asking permission and not with the expression of a man performing courage, but with the particular look of someone who has arrived, through a very long night, at the specific point where they understand exactly what they owe and are prepared to pay it. "Then we go back," he said. "It's what he wants." "I know." He held her gaze. "But I know my father, and I know his network, and I know where he keeps things he doesn't want found." He paused. "You need what's on that drive. I can get you into the system that decrypts it, but we have to be in the same room as Aldrich to do it." She looked at him for a moment. The assessment again. The one she'd given him at the safe house. The one that was deciding what category he belonged in. "He'll use you against me," she said. "He'll try." "And?" Cale touched the cut above his eye, looked at the blood on his fingers. "And I've spent my entire life being used by that man without knowing it." His voice was quiet and flat and completely without self-pity, which was the specific tone of someone who has moved past feeling sorry about something and arrived at what comes next. "I think it's time he found out that stops now." Outside, the Mediterranean was going gray with the first light before dawn, and the fortress was full of the sounds of Renault's team moving through it, and somewhere in the distance a phone was ringing that nobody was going to answer, and the drive in Serena's hand contained the complete map of a 25-year crime that had shaped both of their lives without either of them knowing, and Aldrich Ashcroft was sitting somewhere with a phone and a threat, and the absolute certainty of a man who had always controlled every room he was in, waiting for his son and the woman his money had helped orphan to walk back into his reach. They flew back on the same jet that had brought Serena home 3 days ago, which felt like a different lifetime, and probably was. Cale sat across from her in the cabin with a bandage above his left eye that Cass had applied with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd done field dressing before. And he didn't sleep, and neither did she. And for most of the flight they didn't speak either. Not because there was nothing to say, because there was too much, and the order in which it needed to be said required a clarity that neither of them had yet, running on no sleep and the specific residue that violence leaves in the body, the tremor that doesn't show externally, the hyper-alertness that keeps finding threats in ordinary sounds, the way a door closing too hard makes your hands move before your brain catches up. Renault sat at the front of the cabin with Cass and 2 of the team, reviewing the drive's contents on an air-gapped system. Every few minutes he made a mark on a notepad. His face told nothing, which with Renault meant the contents were significant. At some point over the Bay of Biscay, Kael said, "What happens when we land?" "Massimo first," she said. "He needs the antidote administered within the next 4 hours, or the compound reaches the irreversible stage." She looked out the window at the black beneath them. "Then Aldrich." "And what does that look like?" "Aldrich." She was quiet for a moment. "He sent a threat through a channel that required resources and planning. He's been watching this situation develop for weeks, probably longer. He's not improvising." She turned from the window. "He'll have a position prepared, something that looks like leverage. Will it be leverage? Depends on what he's holding." She paused. "What does he have, Kael?" "Things you know about. Assets, connections, people he controls." Kael thought about his father, the way you think about someone you're trying to see clearly for the first time after a lifetime of looking at them through the distortion of being their child. It was an uncomfortable process, like adjusting your eyes to a different light. "He has 3 political contacts in the EU, he said slowly. "Serious ones, the kind that can make investigations disappear. He has a private security network he's been building since I was in college. I thought it was personal protection, now I think it's something else. And he has—" He stopped. "What?" "He has a system." Kael's voice was careful. "I saw it once, in his private office. I was 15 and I wasn't supposed to be in there. He had a wall, literally a wall, of filing systems, physical, paper. He told me once that the only truly secure information is information that can't be hacked." He looked at his hands. "I thought he meant he was old-fashioned. Now I think he meant something different." "A physical archive," Serena said. "Yes." She looked at him. "Where?" "The family estate. The one outside the city." He met her eyes. "I know the layout. I know the office." She held his gaze for a long moment, doing the calculation. Not of whether to trust him. That decision had been made on a corridor floor in Portugal, but of how to use what he knew in the next 4 hours without getting either of them killed. "Get some sleep," she said. "I can't." "I know. Try anyway." He didn't sleep, but he closed his eyes and she watched the dark outside the window, and Renault made marks on his notepad, and the jet crossed the coast into familiar airspace and began its descent toward morning. Massimo was conscious when they reached the compound. Barely. He was in the medical room on the 2nd floor, which the compound had because Massimo had always believed that proximity to medical care was not a luxury but a basic operational requirement, and the doctor who staffed it, a quiet woman named Falk, who asked no questions and kept excellent records, met Serena at the door with the specific expression of someone managing a deteriorating situation with everything available to them and running low on options. Serena handed her the case. Falk opened it, checked the contents with the rapid assessment of someone who knew exactly what she was looking at, and said, 20 minutes. Will it work? If the timeline is what you've told me, yes. She paused. He's been asking for you. Serena went in. Massimo looked smaller in the bed than he looked anywhere else, which was the cruel arithmetic of illness. It didn't care what a person had built or how long they'd held things together. He turned his head when she came in, and his eyes were clear, which was something. The poison was slow-acting, not mind-altering, and what she saw in them was the specific alertness of a man who is running on stubbornness. You got it, he said. His voice was rougher than usual. I got it. Voss? Gone. She sat in the chair beside the bed. He gave me the archive first. Everything. Then someone blew the window. Massimo closed his eyes for 2 seconds. Aldrich. We think so. He's been cleaning house. He opened his eyes. 25 years of connection to Voss, and now Voss is dead, and he thinks he's the only one left who knows the history. He doesn't know about the drive. No. Massimo's hand moved toward hers, and she met it, which was not something they did often, but she let it happen. His hand was cold. How long until Falk's treatment takes effect? 20 minutes, she said. Then I have 20 minutes to tell you something I should have told you 8 years ago. He held her gaze. His grip on her hand tightened slightly. Not strength exactly, intention. Your parents' investigation, the map they built. I told you Voss had it. It's on the drive. Yes. But there's something on that map that I've known about for 7 years, that I found through my own investigation, that I didn't tell you. He breathed. Your mother wasn't killed immediately. There were 6 hours between when the order was given and when it was completed. During those 6 hours, she made contact with an attorney in Geneva. She transmitted a document package, evidence, the complete record of everything they'd found, everything about the shadow infrastructure, independently verified through sources Voss didn't know she had. Serena was very still. That package has been sitting in a Geneva escrow account for 25 years, Massimo said, triggered to release to 7 international law enforcement agencies simultaneously upon the death of the account holder, your mother, but with a 72-hour delay built in, during which a living heir can redirect it. She heard her own breathing. I'm the living heir, she said. You're the living heir. His voice was quiet and absolute. Your mother built you an exit, a legal one. Evidence so complete that even if every crime family in Europe comes after this organization, the people who ordered her death will face a different kind of justice. He paused. I didn't tell you because I was afraid you'd use it before the time was right, before you had the protection you needed, before... He stopped. Before I was strong enough, she said. Before the structure was strong enough to survive what comes after you use it. She sat with that for a moment. Her mother's hands on a keyboard in 6 hours of borrowed time, building a weapon she would never get to use herself, keeping it intact for a daughter who was 3 years from being born into this world when those 6 hours ended. Is the structure strong enough now? She said. Massimo looked at her with the eyes of a man who has been answering this question for 25 years in his own head and has finally run out of reasons to delay the answer. Yes, he said, because of you. Falk came in with the antidote. Serena stood, let go of his hand. Rest, she said. Don't do anything without telling me first, he said. Rest, she said again, and left. Aldrich Ashcroft's estate sat on 12 acres outside the city, behind a wall and a gate and a security system that Kael had grown up treating as normal, the way children treat whatever surrounds them as normal. The house itself was old stone and new glass, the kind of renovation that costs more than the original building and communicates that the owner both respects history and intends to dominate it. They arrived at 10 in the morning, not in force, Serena, Kael, Renaud, and 2 others. The gate opened when Kael put his palm to the reader, which told them something. Aldrich had not revoked his son's access. That was either oversight or intention, and with Aldrich, it was never oversight. The house staff had been sent away. They knew this because the house was the specific quiet of a building that's usually occupied and isn't, that particular hollow quality that large houses develop when the machinery of daily life stops. No sounds from the kitchen, no movement on the upper floors. Just Aldrich, in the study at the back of the house, which was where Kael had told them he would be, because the study was where Aldrich Ashcroft conducted everything that mattered. He was standing when they came in, 70 years old, impeccably dressed, with the posture of a man who has decided how this is going to go. Behind him, the wall that Kael had described, floor to ceiling, organized, the physical archive of a man who understood that paper doesn't have vulnerabilities. He looked at Kael first. You brought her here, he said. Not accusatory. Assessing. I brought myself here, Kael said. She's who I brought with me. Aldrich's gaze moved to Serena. He looked at her with the attention of someone who has been studying a subject for years and is now seeing it in person for the first time in a context he controls, and whatever he was calculating showed only in the slight tension at the corners of his eyes. "You have the drive," he said. "I have the drive," she said. "And you think it's enough?" He moved to the desk, sat, the deliberate ease of a man claiming the room. Financial records from a system that no longer has a living owner, sourced from a man who staged his own death and was killed by an explosion of unknown origin before he could testify to anything. He folded his hands. "I've been in 3 different legal proceedings that were built on stronger foundations than that, and walked out of all 3. "I know," Serena said. "That's why I'm not here about the drive." A beat. "Then what are you here about?" Aldrich said. She reached into her jacket and placed a document on the desk in front of him. A single page printed with a case reference number at the top and a Geneva law firm's letterhead. Aldrich looked at it. She watched his face. She watched it the way she watched every face in every room, the way Massimo had taught her. Not the words, not the surface, the body underneath the performance. And what she saw in Aldrich Ashcroft's face when he read the document was something she had not seen there in 5 years of proximity. Fear. "My mother built that 25 years ago," Serena said. "She had 6 hours. She used them well." She let him sit with the document for 3 more seconds. "The package releases in 42 hours to 7 agencies unless I redirect it, which I will do, conditionally." She paused. "One condition." Aldrich looked up from the document. "A full written account," she said. "Everything. Your relationship with Voss, the funding, the dates, the purpose. Your knowledge of the order given for my parents. Every political contact you used to insulate yourself. Every account. Every transfer. Everything that isn't already on the drive." She held his gaze. "Signed, witnessed, delivered to my attorney in the next 24 hours. And in exchange," Aldrich said, "the package redirects. You don't face 7 simultaneous international investigations." She paused. "You face one. Domestic. With significantly more limited scope." He looked at her for a long time. The calculation in his eyes was running hard, assessing angles, looking for the one she'd missed. She'd been looking for it herself for the past 4 hours and hadn't found it. "And Kael," Aldrich said. His voice changed when he said his son's name. Not much, but enough. The one place the performance got slightly less controlled. "What happens to Kael?" She waited for Kael to speak. She'd told him she would do this. Kael stepped forward. He moved around her to stand directly in front of the desk, between Serena and his father, which was where he'd decided to stand before they'd walked through the gate. "I've been looking at the accounts," Kael said. His voice was level. The specific level of someone who has been angry for a long time and has moved through the anger into something quieter and more permanent on the other side. "The capital injections. The anonymous investors who kept the company solvent." He paused. "I know where the money came from. I know what it was before it was in my company." He held his father's gaze. "I'm giving it back." Aldrich said, "Kael, not as a legal maneuver, not as a settlement." His jaw was tight. "I'm liquidating every asset that traces to that source, every project that was built on that capital. I'm starting with nothing, or close to it, and whatever I build from there, I build clean." He paused. "And you're going to let me, because the alternative is, I testify voluntarily to every one of those 7 agencies, and I don't stop talking until there's nothing left to say." The room was quiet. Aldrich looked at his son with an expression that was complex in a way that was hard to read. Not quite pride, not quite grief, something that sat between them in the way feelings sit when a parent understands that their child has finally become something they cannot manage. "I built that company," Aldrich said quietly. "You built it on the wrong foundation," Kael said. "That's not a legacy. That's a liability." Another silence. Outside, wind moved through the estate grounds, and somewhere in the house something settled, the sound of old wood adjusting to temperature. Aldrich looked back at Serena. "The account," he said, "in Geneva. If I give you the full record—" "Redirects to a domestic investigation with limited scope," she said. "My attorney's terms, not mine. Read the letter." He read it again. More slowly this time, the way you read something you're going to sign. Then he looked at the wall behind him. The archive. 25 years of organized paper, The physical history of a man who had believed that what couldn't be digitized couldn't be found. He stood, walked to the wall, stood in front of it with his back to both of them for a long moment. "I'll need a day," he said. "You have 24 hours, she said. He nodded. Once. The nod of a man who has arrived at the end of a road he built himself. She picked up the letter from the desk and looked at Kael. He looked back at her. His face was tired, and the cut above his eye was dark at the edges, and he looked like someone who had been carrying something very heavy and had just set it down. And the setting down was not relief exactly. It was something more complicated, the specific feeling of a person who has done the right thing and knows it costs more than doing the wrong thing would have. She walked out. He followed. 1. Massimo was sitting up in bed when she came back. Not fully vertical, propped, with the careful positioning of someone whose body was still negotiating the aftermath of what had been done to it. But his eyes were sharp, and the color had returned to his face, and Falk, standing near the door with her arms crossed, gave Serena a single nod that meant, "He'll be fine." "Tell me," he said. She told him. All of it. The study, the document, Aldrich's face, Kael's accounting of himself. She gave it to him straight, the way she'd learned to give him information, without softening and without embellishment. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. "Your mother," he said finally. "Yes." She thought of everything. She thought of what mattered. Serena sat in the same chair as before. The room was warmer now, or she was warmer, one of the two. "The captain's. What's the position?" "Lane came to me this morning," Massimo said, "before the antidote. He thought I was dying, and he came anyway." A pause. "He told me Benedek had approached him 6 weeks ago with an offer from Lucian. Lane declined. He also told me he's been documenting Benedek's movements for 4 months. He was waiting to see which way the weight fell," she said. "He waited until he was certain, and then he acted." Massimo almost smiled. "I've always liked Lane." "And Benedek?" "Lane has the documentation. Benedek is finished." He looked at her. "Lucien spoke to me this morning as well, before you arrived." She waited. "He asked for nothing," Massimo said. "He didn't ask for forgiveness, didn't ask for his position to be reconsidered. He asked if Massimo the father would still speak to him, separate from Massimo the head of this organization." He paused. "I told him yes. I told him the organization was a different question." "And what's the answer to that question?" "He'll stay. In a limited capacity with oversight for a period he doesn't get to decide the length of." Massimo's voice was quiet. "He made choices that cost people. He has to live with those choices, and also with the consequences of them. That's not punishment. That's how it works." She nodded. "And the formal succession," she said. "Tomorrow," Massimo said. "If you're ready." She thought about that for a moment. Ready. She'd been preparing for this for years, in the specific way of someone who studies a thing from every angle, so that when the moment arrives, the decision has already been made, and all that remains is to make it visible. "I'm ready," she said. "Then tomorrow." He leaned back against the pillows. "Go sleep, Serena. You look terrible. You were poisoned 12 hours ago. And I look better than you do." He closed his eyes. "Go." She stood. At the door she paused, not with anything specific to say, just the pause of someone who needs a moment to register that the person in the bed is still there, still breathing, still the irreducible, complicated fact of themselves. Then she went. The formal succession assembly was held the following afternoon in the main hall, which had been cleared of the summit furniture and arranged in the older configuration, the semicircle of chairs that the organization used for its most significant decisions, a configuration that dated to before Massimo, inherited from the structure that had existed before him. All 7 resident captains were present, Lane in the second chair, composed. Voss's seat empty by Serena's direction, filled when a replacement was named, not before. Caro in the 5th chair with the expression of a man who had read which way the weight was falling and had made his peace with it. The 2 captains who had been neutral throughout sitting close together, which was their habit and probably their comfort. Lucien was present. In the last chair to the right, which was not his usual position and which he had taken without being asked, as a statement about where he understood himself to be in this room. Massimo stood at the center, He was using a cane, which he had refused until this morning when Falk had told him the cane was not optional, and he held it with the specific displeasure of someone tolerating a necessary thing. He looked at the assembly with the eyes of a man who has held a room for a long time and is about to do something he has been building toward for years. He spoke for 8 minutes. He spoke about the organization, its history, its structure, its purpose as he understood it, which was not romance and not ideology, but the specific function of a body that maintained order in spaces where official order did not reach, that protected people who had no other protection, that had done things in its history it should not have done, and had also done things that nothing else would have done. He spoke about the cost of leadership. He spoke about succession, not as inheritance, but as accountability, the transfer not of power, but of responsibility, which was heavier and could not be assigned, only chosen. Then he said Serena's name. She stood. She walked to the center of the room and stood beside him and looked at the assembly, at 7 faces in various states of acceptance and calculation, and something that was beginning, in some of them, to look like genuine attention. And she waited for the room to settle. "I'm not going to tell you what this organization is going to become," she said. "I'm going to show you, over time, through decisions." She held Lane's gaze for a moment, then moved to Caro's, then to each in turn. "What I will tell you now is what I will not do. I will not maintain systems I cannot account for. I will not protect people who use this organization's structure to harm people inside it or outside it. I will not manage threats privately and call it leadership." She paused. "We've been operating with a shadow under the foundation for 25 years. That's finished." A silence that was the specific silence of people absorbing something they'd suspected and are now hearing confirmed. The captain who've been approached in the last year with offers that originated outside official channels. She looked at the room. "I know who you are. I know what you were offered. I'm not interested in that history unless you make it relevant by the choices you make from today forward." She paused. Questions. Caro spoke first, which she'd expected. Caro always moved fast when he'd made a decision. The Benedek situation. Being handled through Lane, who has documentation, formal process, transparent to this assembly. Caro nodded. The financial restructuring. There are accounts that were connected to Voss's infrastructure that our operations ran through. Being mapped by our internal team, every account will be audited and either validated or closed. Timeline is 30 days. She met his eyes. "Your operations are not at risk. I'm not dismantling the organization. I'm cleaning the infrastructure it runs on." Caro looked at the table, then back at her. He had the expression of someone who'd been ready to argue and had found the argument wasn't necessary. "All right," he said. "Simple. Final." The rest of the session took 40 minutes. She answered questions directly and without managing them. Some questions she had complete answers to, some she said she didn't have answers to yet, some she said she'd have answers to within a specific time frame and gave the time frame. The assembly had dealt with leaders who controlled through information asymmetry for so long that the experience of someone simply answering was, she could see it on their faces, slightly disorienting. Good. Disorientation in the right direction was a tool. When it was over and the captains began moving toward the door, Lane passed her and stopped. "Well done," he said. Quiet, direct. He didn't wait for a response. She watched them file out. Lucien was last. He moved past her with his eyes forward, not avoiding her, not performing anything, just moving through the room with the bearing of someone who has accepted where they stand and is learning to stand there. At the door he stopped. "The archive," he said. "The records from year 23 through 25. The ones you were reading when I came in." He didn't turn around. "You found the reactivated account the first morning. You knew before I admitted anything." "Yes." "You gave me the chance to tell it myself." A pause. "Yes." He nodded. Walked out. Cale left 3 days later. Not abruptly. There was no drama in it. No scene at a doorway. He came to her in the evening, in the courtyard, where she'd developed the habit of sitting for 30 minutes after dinner because Massimo did it and she'd grown up watching him, and it turned out the habit had lodged in her without her noticing. He sat in the chair across from her, the one Massimo didn't use, and they sat in the November dark for a minute before either of them spoke. "Aldrich delivered the document," he said. "My attorney confirmed it this morning." "I know. Mine did too." And the investigation process starts next week. Yes. He looked at his hands. He'd lost the bandage above his eye, and the cut was a thin red line, healing the way cuts do, the body doing its ordinary work regardless of everything around it. I'm going back. There's a lot to unwind. The company, the assets. He paused. I've been thinking about what comes after, when the unwinding is done. What have you been thinking? I don't know yet. He looked up. That might be the first honest answer I've given to that question in 20 years. She looked at him in the thin light of the courtyard, at the cut and the tiredness and the specific quality of a person who has had something fundamental restructured and is still in the early stage of understanding what the new shape is. He looked like someone she didn't know well enough and had spent 5 years standing next to. You didn't see me, she said, not accusatory, stating. No. He held her gaze. I didn't look. A pause. Those aren't the same thing, and I spent a long time treating them like they were. She accepted that. It was accurate. The distinction mattered, and he knew it mattered, which was the difference between a man performing accountability and a man who had actually arrived at it. When you finished unwinding it, she said, and you know what comes after. If you want to talk about what that looks like, you can find me. He looked at her for a long moment. Not a promise, he said. Not a promise, she agreed. A door that isn't locked. He nodded. He stood, looked at the courtyard, at the stone and the dark and the compound that was exactly what it was, not hiding itself. He looked at it the way you look at something you're trying to remember accurately. I'm sorry, he said, for the 5 years, for the lobby, for... He stopped. All of it. I know, she said. I'm not the person you owe that to the most. He understood. He looked at the ground for a moment, and the weight of what she meant was visible in the way his shoulders held, and then he straightened. Good night, Serena, he said. Good night, Cale. He walked through the gate. She listened to his footsteps on the gravel until they stopped, replaced by the sound of a car, which faded and then was gone. She sat in the courtyard for a long time after. The compound was quiet around her, the specific quiet of a place whose machinery had slowed but not stopped, the sounds of a house at night that is inhabited by people going about their lives rather than managing a crisis. The night shift of guards somewhere, their footsteps a distant rhythm. A light on in Massimo's study, which meant he was up, which was not a surprise. A light off in Lucian's wing, which was. She thought about her mother, sitting at a keyboard in 6 hours she had not expected to have, building something for a daughter who didn't exist yet. Not in panic, she thought. Her mother had been... She barely remembered her. It was mostly images, sensory fragments, the smell of something, a voice's texture. But she thought her mother had been the kind of person who met the worst circumstances with the cleanest possible thinking, who used whatever was available, who built things that lasted. She thought about the Geneva package, redirected now, the evidence transmitted to the one agency whose terms her mother's attorney had verified were cleanest. The process would be long. Justice, when it came through official channels, was slow and imperfect and sometimes didn't come at all. But the record existed. The account was documented. Aldrich Ashcroft's signed statement was in 3 lawyers' hands in 3 different jurisdictions, and Voss's complete archive was in 2 more. It wasn't everything. It would never be everything. 25 years didn't resolve cleanly. There was no version of this story that ended without remainder, without costs that couldn't be repaid, without the specific grief that has no remedy, because what it wants back cannot be returned. Her parents were 25 years dead, and no legal proceeding would change the arithmetic of that. But the record existed. And that, her mother had understood, was what you built when you couldn't build anything else. The insistence that what happened be documented, be seen, be carried forward by someone who knew what it cost. She was that someone. She sat until the light in Massimo's study went off and the compound settled into its deepest quiet, and then she stood and went inside. The next morning she was at her desk before 6, reading the first report from the financial audit team. Renaud brought coffee at 6:15 without being asked. At 7, Lane called with a question about the Benedict process that she answered in 4 sentences. At 8, the new communications director, someone Serena had appointed 2 days ago, a woman named Priya who had spent 12 years in international intelligence and had the specific gift of saying exactly what she meant without anything extra. Sent the first weekly brief, clean and direct, the way Serena had asked for it. By 9, the sun was fully up over the compound, which looked in the morning light like exactly what it was. A place that had been built for a purpose, that had served that purpose imperfectly and violently, and sometimes brilliantly for a long time, and that was now in the hands of someone who intended to make it into something that could look at itself clearly. Not a perfect, not clean in any absolute sense. Nothing human was, but accountable. That was the word she kept returning to. Accountable for what it was and what it did, and what it cost the people around it, which was different from the organization she'd inherited, and was the only version of it she was willing to run. At 10, Massimo knocked on the study door. He came in with his cane, which he was learning to carry without obvious resentment, and sat in the chair across from her desk. Not the chair he used to sit in, Serena's chair now, but the one across from it, which was where she had sat for years receiving information and making plans. He sat there now with the ease of someone who has put down something heavy and found, unexpectedly, that the putting down didn't diminish him. "You're in early," he said. "I'm always in early." "You didn't used to be." He looked at her with the specific attention he'd always given her, the kind that saw without requiring her to perform anything. "How do you feel?" She thought about that, the honest version. "Like someone who has finished a very long thing," she said, "and is now standing at the beginning of a different very long thing." She paused. "Like my mother would have had opinions about my filing system." He laughed. It was brief and genuine, and it changed his face into something 20 years younger for a moment. "She would have had opinions about everything," he said. "I know." He looked at the desk, at the reports and the brief and the coffee cup, at the room that had been his and was now hers, the transition complete in the way that matters, not ceremonially but actually, in the daily texture of who sat where and who made the first calls and who the reports were addressed to. "You're going to be better at this than I was," he said. "You were very good at it." "I was good at managing it," he said. "You're going to be good at changing it." He tapped the cane against the floor once. "Different skill. More important one, where we are now." She looked at him, at the lines in his face and the careful way he held himself, and the eyes that were still, after everything, the sharpest thing in any room he entered. She thought about the 19-year-old who had sat across from this man in fury and grief, and had been given, instead of pity, a problem to solve and the tools to solve it, about what that had cost him and what it had made her. "Thank you," she said. He waved it off the way he waved off everything that moved him. "Get back to work," he said. But he was still smiling when he stood, and the smile was still there when he walked out, and the door closed behind him with the quiet certainty of a man who had done what he set out to do. She turned back to the report. Outside, the morning was clear and cold, and the grounds were bright with it, and somewhere beyond the compound walls the world was continuing its business. Kyle on a plane back to a city and a life he was going to rebuild from the foundation up. Lane reviewing documentation, Priya drafting the week's external communications. Lucian somewhere in the East Wing, learning to inhabit a smaller space with the same integrity he'd brought to a larger one before integrity had proven insufficient. Aldrich Ashcroft in a lawyer's office, signing the final pages of a statement that had taken him 68 years to produce. Her mother's evidence, moving through official channels, slow and imperfect and real. She picked up the next report. The organization that had been built on violence and sustained through secrecy and run for decades by a man who had loved it and managed it and protected it at costs he was still paying. That organization was hers now, and what she was going to do with it was not a story with a clean ending, because the things worth doing never have clean endings. They have continuations. They have the next morning and the next decision and the slow work of making something that can carry its own weight honestly. She had never needed a crown to know what she was. She had never needed anyone to see her to be worth seeing. But it was better, she thought, looking at the morning through the window of the room that was now hers. It was better that she was seen. She got back to work.